All right, Romans 12, we're in verse 20. Romans 12:20. It says, "Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head." Now, I've heard people try to say that means something other than what it said. He says it'll heap coals of fire. The way I've heard it explained is this. In the old days, they didn't have matches, so in order to get a new fire started, you would take the coals, and if your neighbor was out of coals, you could put them in a bucket and you would carry it on your head. That's stretching it really hard. I think he really means coals sitting on your head burning you up. Now, he used one word in there, heap coals. That tells me that somebody's getting burned up. Now, if you do right, the lost world feels that way. They feel burn up, they're hot and bothered because you're doing something they're not. If you'll live right when they're living wicked, it gets under their skin. He says right here, it's supposed to heap coals on them. It does several things. It doubles a man's condemnation when you treat him well. He says to do well to him. If he's hungry or thirsty, give him something to eat and drink. He says that's going to double. It's going to heap something on him. He's going to increase condemnation. Look at it in Psalm 140. Psalm 140, verse 10. If somebody wants to tell you that heap coals of fire on his head means that you're doing him well by your providing fire starter for him for the next winter, take them here and show them how the word is used. Psalm 140, verse 10. Let burning coals fall upon them. Does that sound like you're helping somebody? Let them be cast into the fire, into deep pits, that they rise not up again. Oh, okay, well, just run a couple of references on the phrase and you'll understand it means exactly what you thought it meant. People want to try to make the Bible soft where it's not soft and try to make it hard where it's not hard. Just let the Bible speak for itself. You know, I think the reason they do that is so people will applaud them as though they got something out of it that you couldn't get out of it. The Bible, nobody has a magic formula to understanding the Bible that you need to go worship. Otherwise, he would appoint a Moses. We don't have Moses anymore. He's gone. Back then, they had one man they had to look at, Moses. Then it was Joshua. And then it was nobody. A bunch of little peons here and there would pop up. I'll lead you out for a few years. That's where we are now. A bunch of little peons pop up. The person that we follow is Jesus Christ, not a man. And if you'll read what he says, then he'll explain it to you. Proverbs 25. Proverbs 25:21. He says, if thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. He didn't say steak. Don't overdo it. You'll create a welfare line. I mean, I'm being facetious, but not by much. You do help them. But help doesn't mean you make them depend on you. When somebody needs help, help them. But don't go extravagant with it, or you create the welfare system. And you never want to replace God in their life. Let God be God. When God tells you to help somebody, you do your part. But never, ever do we become the salvation for anybody. Otherwise, we've taken his place. He says, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. Water. Used to, you got water real cheap. You just turn the tap on, put your cup under there. Now you go to buy it in the bottle where somebody else turned the tap on. Put it in the bottle. Exodus 4. Or not Exodus 4. Exodus 23. Exodus 23, verse 4. There's too many verses in this Bible on enemies for everybody to be, they want to push this brotherhood of, fatherhood of God and brotherhood of man, as though we're all on the same page and we all love God in our own way, and, Oprah Winfrey. silliness. No, you don't. There's two sides. There's God and the devil. There always has been, always will be. You're on one side or the other. Even if you're on God's side and you slip over and go work for the devil for a while, you're still on one side or the other. At the time you're doing it, you're doing something for one side or the other. Exodus 23:4. If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. Oof, that sounds pretty tough. That's a lot of work. To drag an ox? Get that? The ox left the field for a reason. You think he wants to go back there? No, but you got to do the work to get him back. He says, if thou see the ox of him that hateth thee lie under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help him with it. Help with him. He says, no excuses. If even your enemy is in a bad situation, go be kind. Now, he didn't change him from an enemy to a friend at that point. He still remains the enemy. However, our enemy is spiritual, not physical. There's the difference. In the physical, you help him. In the spiritual, you're not on the same page. And don't let him think you are. Luke 23. Luke 23, verse 34. This is Jesus, of course, on the cross. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. Jesus says, they don't know what they're doing. They don't. They were pawns in a game. They didn't realize it. He says if they understood what they were doing, there's no way they would have crucified God's Son. They didn't have the understanding. But that was their fault. When a man tries to close his eyes to God, he'll try so many times, and then just like Pharaoh, God will say, let me help you. And he'll shut them even tighter. That's what's going on here. Matthew 5, verse 44. Matthew 5:44. This is the Sermon on the Mount, only it's not the sermon, the teaching on the Mount. He says, Matthew 5:44, but I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Of that whole list, there's probably only one thing on there you'll consistently be able to do. And that is pray for them. Nowadays, your enemy, you may never meet face to face. It's all virtual world we live in. Or it's, somebody across town putting a bad review on you. Okay, you may never see that person, but you can pray. That one goes beyond the human. Put it into the spirit realm. In the spiritual, we always win. But in the physical, we may not. Romans 12, verse 21. Romans 12:21. He says, be not overcome of evil. That tells me evil is trying to actively do something. Evil is trying to overcome a person. If you're not careful, it will. It'll take you over. There's no exception to that. He didn't say, you young Christians, be careful that evil doesn't overtake you. No, it's everybody, period. He says, but overcome evil with good. One of the ways to keep wickedness and evil at bay is to actively be involved in something good. So just be a good doer. We should be, the world wants to call us goody two-shoes. We should be. That's keeping evil at bay. That's what we're supposed to be known for. It's not enough to stop doing bad things. We have to replace doing bad things with doing good things. Even better. Proverbs 16. Proverbs 16, verse 32. evil shows up real quickly, and one of the ways evil overtakes a man is in anger. Anger is one of those things that is so difficult to control because it'll creep up on you, and it is such a con man. It tells you you're right. Of course you've got a right to be mad. Everybody else is an idiot but you. Proverbs 16:32. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. That is ruling your spirit. That is your attitude. Ever wake up, I'm sure you have, ever wake up and just been in a bad mood? You can change it. That mood is subject to you. He says right here, you're supposed to be able to rule your spirit. There are spirits out there in the world, wicked, evil spirits. And their job is to overcome you. That is, they're wanting to be more mighty than your spirit. And so what our job is to rule our own spirit. Until that spirit get lost, we're going to have a good day today. This is the day the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Doesn't mean that we want to. He says we will. Sometimes you got to tell yourself just like that. Shut up, boy. You're going to have a good time today, whether you want to or not. Romans 13. Romans 13:1. And we'll cover 6 verses just to get, because it's all one paragraph here. Romans 13:1. He says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. Although they're wanting to take the swords away from them. Just carry a stun gun. No swords are allowed. For he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Basically, you're not supposed to have vengeance or wrath unless you're in a position where that's your position. He says right here, God has ordained certain people to carry out his vengeance and wrath. Verse 5. Wherefore you must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Okay, the Bible basically is saying simply we have to obey those that are over us. Governmentally, instituted positions. Doesn't mean that we have to laud everybody in a governmental position as though they're spiritually wholesome, because they probably ain't. However, the position is there because of God. As Americans, we should be able to see that clearly, because of all the governments, we got the best, I think. However, when Paul's writing this, who's in charge? Nero. And he says, you better obey those rulers. I find it very odd. If Paul was a modern day Christian, you know what your Bible would look like? It'd look like 13 books on how wicked the government is. But that's not what he wrote. He said, you Christians are something totally different than this world down here. Don't get tied up in their mess. A lot of this mess down here is designed to distract us from the real. The real is not what we see down here. Exodus 1. Exodus 1, verse 17.
I'm trying to remember scripture I just read a while ago, somewhere he calls one of these evil rulers that took the Jews away. He said, my servant, he called
Yeah.
him a servant.
Yes.
Because he uses
That would be,
Yeah, I was trying to think, too, I couldn't remember.
yes.
But he's a servant.
Yes.
Because he serves
Sennacherib
God.
or
Cyrus.
Cyrus. Yeah. He says it was more than just one person.
I was thinking Nebuchadnezzar
Yeah.
was what popped in my head. But anyway, he says, my
Mhm.
servant.
Yep.
And this is an evil man.
Mhm.
He's serving God, so he's a servant.
For the moment.
Yeah, for that moment in time, yes.
He says in Exodus 1:17, here's a good time to buck the system. There are some times you have to buck the system. Exodus 1:17, but the midwives feared God and did not as the king commanded them, but saved the men children alive. There they went 180 degrees opposite of what the authority said you must do. Now, it doesn't say that they started preaching hate for the king, but they sure didn't follow his command, and because of that, God blesses them. Now, if a person ever goes against what God says to do, your authority, you know, and I know, we obey God rather than man. That's clear. And there are times that's going to happen, and we should be just as dedicated to that as the times that it's okay to do what they say. We should still be dedicated. In Acts 5, verse 29. Acts 5, verse 29. Now, I doubt we're going to have an incident like this where we're getting stoned and beat up and cast out of the city for preaching. But maybe.
Oh, I don't know.
Acts 5:29. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. Now, that's a no-brainer. If there is a God, why would you listen to man over God? I'm going to be careful how I say this. Probably not, but I'll try. How many churches shut the door during COVID because man said, shut the door? We ought to obey God rather than man. Now, I'm not saying every one of them should have not shutting the door. Maybe they should have. You go to God with that. Ask Him what you're supposed to do. We shut the door here. If I get sick, we're going to shut the door. I don't want to spread it. Okay? But I'm not looking to the government to tell me when I can open and shut the door. They got no place in here. 1 Peter 2. First Peter 2, verse 13. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. Now, of course, if the ordinance goes against what God says, then you're an idiot to submit to it. Whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. That is, people just disobeying the law because they felt like it and trying to put a spiritual spin on it. You know, we can always find a way around doing anything we don't want to do. The attitude should always be submission, not belligerence. And if the attitude is right, many times God will rearrange the circumstances. He's bigger than man, always. Verse 15. For so is the will of God. Everybody wants to know what the will of God is? The will of God is basically, where did we start? Verse 13, the first word, submit. That's the will of God. Just about every day when you wake up, you can say, okay, what's the will of God? Submit. Okay, I got it. Because we're so cocky and self-willed, that word has to be prominent in our lives. Submit. He says, I used to hear the message all the time, wives submit. And that's true. They better. They got to get in there and submit me something to eat and submit me some coffee. But he's got another verse in there and says, yea, every one of you be subject one to another. So we're supposed to all submit to everybody. It's an attitude. It's not the individual actions. But our attitude should be preferring one over another. Romans 13:2. He says, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. The position is what he's referring to, not the individual. The individual is put there to carry out a function. The individual, God will pick one up and use him for 10 minutes and kick him out and put another one in there. And it's the position God is using, maybe not the individual. He says, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now, he's not here referring to damnation as in going to hell. He's look how he uses it before, Romans 8, verse 1. He says, there is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. That is, in the flesh, you can still get condemnation. He's saying there's a time that God says your flesh is all right. Okay, I'm not going to say I love it, but I'm not going to come down there and smash it if you'll live right. You know, a Christian who lives right has a better life than one who doesn't. I mean, if it's just in their conscience, for sure, that right there, they have a better conscience. There's condemnation in the flesh from God for anybody who sins, saved or lost. That's that damnation. He's not a ruler on earth couldn't damn you to hell. That would be impossible. They don't run it. They didn't make it. God did. God's the only one that can do that. Romans 13, verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil, most of the time. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. God's plan for the government is to maintain the law and order that he decides. Now, when the government disobeys God and does not do what God intends, God will deal with them. And we shouldn't fall in line behind them. John MacArthur went through a big deal in California during COVID when they were trying to shut all those churches down. And he has enough clout that that he got some attorneys together and they sued the state. In fact, when is it? It may have already happened. He was doing a big movie on it, a documentary movie, and it's going to be in theaters. But he was releasing it to all the mega churches on when to obey God and when to obey the government. Yeah, very, very interesting. But that he's got a pulpit that is heard by lots of people, so I'm glad to hear him do something like that, balanced. Acts 5 verse 29. Oh, we already covered that one. That's Peter saying you've got to obey God rather than man. You obey man as long as man in his right position is doing what God intends. But when man says, no, you do this, and it goes against what God said, then you're disobeying God if you obey him. Then you choose one of the two. Romans 13:4. For he is the minister of God to thee, for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. The government officials, and by that I mean the military. People don't realize that, but I mean the military. If you're in the military, you are a minister of God. So, just like a preacher, they're a minister. The police officers, the code enforcement, all of those positions, those are positions of government. The Bible says right here they're the ministers of God. Well, do we listen to a minister supposedly in a church that goes off the deep end? No, you still have to have balance there too. So just because somebody's a minister doesn't mean you blindly follow them. No. This also proves capital punishment. God is strict. You read that Old Testament, you find out if you steal one lamb, you got to repay 4. Okay, he goes a little extreme with that, but that's him. He can do what he wants to. So this idea of life is sacred and we don't ever hurt the murderer, we put him up for life, and no, that's not the way God handles it. Matter of fact, he says the way you do it is you shed the blood of him who shed innocent blood. Genesis 9 verse 5. Genesis 9 verse 5. This is something that is not preached, I guess because it's Old Testament. We have people who think that animals are on the same or higher level than humans. They're insane. Genesis 9 verse 5. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it. At the hand of man and at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. If an animal takes the life of a human, the animal's supposed to die. Furthermore, he says if you knew your ox was want to push, that is, he had a habit of being boisterous and flipping things he shouldn't have been flipping. My uncle had a pasture with cows and bulls in it. He had 2 bulls, and he didn't want them to get in the same field because they would fight. And one day, the big bull and the little bull, by little I don't mean very little, but he called it little. I was small, but I thought they were all huge, One day, the big bull and the little bull got in the same field, and the big bull flipped the little one over its head. That's some power right there. Just sent him flying. He says right here, if the animals come against man, I'm so serious about blood being shed, we will dilute it by shedding that man's blood or animal. He says in verse 6, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. That's an important verse to know for a couple of reasons. For in the image of God made he man. That does not mean every man is like God. Every man had the image and broke it. Because every man is separate from God till joined in the same family. They have the image as much as they can as a lost person. As a lost person, they have enough mind that God's embedded in them to respond to God's invitation. And if a man will respond to it, then God puts him in the family, and then he's as much like God as he can be on this earth. The balance to it is you're in the image of Adam who sinned. Adam was made in the image of God, and he sinned and he lost something, didn't he? Yeah. That doesn't mean that he's no longer in the image of God. It means that part of the image is void, is empty, needs to be filled by God. Exodus 21. Exodus 21, verse 12. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. I think the death penalty is pretty clear. If somebody murders somebody, you go kill them. Now, I understand you want to make sure that that's the real deal. You don't want to just kill people because somebody told you a good story. That's what attorneys are for, and lawyers and all that stuff. You want to make sure. But by the same token, we don't want to stretch it out for 40 years. That's not fair to anybody. Look at Acts 25. Acts 25, verse 11. Acts 25:11. This is Paul. We've already seen that he believed in the death penalty. Acts 25:11. For if I be offender, or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. I get such a kick out of that verse. If somebody's going to chop your head off, do you think you can refuse to die? If they chop your head off, you're dead. He says, if you're going to kill me, I'm not going to refuse to die. That's not the point of it. Here's the point. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal to Caesar. He says, you've got to go by the law. There has to be a just cause for it. And if you can prove there's a just cause, then bring the sword on. Romans 12, look at verse 19. Romans 12, verse 19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Most people think God is the one who determines life and death, but as we've seen in Romans 13, God gives that position to humans as well. There are ministers that he's put in charge of taking vengeance for him. Now, they're going to have to give account if they don't uphold their job that God gave them. But that's what God intended for them. I think this thing is a lot more severe than man is taking on. When we get to the judgment, if God gave a governmental official the job of being in the military or the police, he's going to ask them, did you hold back your sword from drawing blood when it should have? Because that was the position I put you in, to be my avenger of evil. And there's going to be a lot that are going to have a lot to say when we get to heaven in our age, who are doing it just the opposite. Joshua 20. Joshua 20, verse 5. We're just about back to the Wild West days. And once this Wild West kicks in, we're going to have to go back to biblical Wild West days and figure out how we act. He says, Joshua 20, verse 5. And if the avenger of blood pursue after him, then they shall not deliver the slayer up unto his hands, because he smote his neighbor unwittingly and hated him not before time. That is manslaughter. Didn't mean to kill somebody, but the axe came off the handle and smacked him in the head, and he died. Look at verse 9. These were the cities appointed for all the children of Israel, and for the strangers that sojourned among them, that whosoever killeth any person at unawares might flee thither, and not die by the hand of the avenger of blood, until he stood before the congregation. It's not a get out of penalty free if you can make it into the city. He still has to stand trial. A lot of people miss that. They think there's a city of refuge, therefore if a person can get to the city of refuge, he's safe. No, he's not. Just means now he gets to stand trial. Does not mean that we've suddenly declared him innocent if he made it into the city. No, facts are still facts. Ezekiel 25. Ezekiel 25, verse 14. One day we're going to become, all Christians, the avenger of evil for God. And physically smashing and killing people. I know that sounds really wild, but at the second advent we're coming back with him, and he says in Psalms that he gives us this honor to execute vengeance. Ezekiel 25, verse 14. And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel. He says one day I'm turning Israel loose, and they're going to go carry out my vengeance. So while we say vengeance is God, that's true. Don't try to steal it from him. But if he tells you to take vengeance, and one day he will, then you have to obey that too. Romans 13:5. Romans 13:5. Oh, we better stop. I've already gone past my time. All right, we'll pick it up at Romans 13:5. And this could go... Yeah, we better cut it off there. We didn't make it past the first paragraph, but we'll pick it up there. All right, Romans 13:5 next time.
You're saying from that Old Testament verse that you pulled up there that when we come back on our white horses, we're going to be doing it too.
I think so. Look at it in Psalm 148, I believe it is.
Psalm 148.
I think so. No, 149. We'll start in verse 1. Praise ye the Lord. Sing unto the Lord a new song. So forth, so on. 2. Let Israel rejoice in him that made him. Let the children of Zion be joyful in their King, capital K, Jesus Christ. Let them praise his name in the dance. Let them sing praises unto him with the timbrel and harp. For the Lord taketh pleasure in his people. He ain't right now, but one day he will. And he will beautify the meek with salvation. Inherited salvation, so all Israel shall be saved. Let the saints be joyful in glory. Okay, that's somebody who's in glory now. That's a saint. Let them sing aloud upon their beds. So we get to lay around and sleep all day and have... No. Let the high praise of God be in their mouth and a two-edged sword in their hand. Now I know everybody wants to make that the Bible, and you can spiritualize it that way, but he didn't spiritualize it. Here's how you know. What do you do with that sword? To execute vengeance upon the heathen and punishments upon the people, to bind their kings with chains and their nobles with fetters of iron, to execute upon them the judgment written, this honor have all his saints. Praise you the Lord. He says, one day I'm turning loose all my boys. I've gathered them up into an army, and they're going to go do some battle. I think of it just like Abraham did. When Abraham went to save Lot, he has his own little army trained up. I don't know when he started training them, but they did some business. They knocked out an army that the Civil War had determined a winner of, and his little bunch comes in there and beats them up. That's what's going to go on when we come back.